Welcome to Socially Unacceptable, from F***ups to Fame, the marketing podcast that celebrates the professional mishaps, mistakes and misjudgments while delivering valuable marketing and life lessons in the time it takes you to eat your lunch.
What if the sort of Google as portal to the whole internet begins to erode? What does that mean for marketers? Well, it means that's a less certain place to go looking for audience. Same thing with social. You know, social media platforms are now broadly eating themselves.
You used the word inevitable there, which was probably sent shivers down the spine of some listeners. So are you saying it is inevitable that brands, regardless of who they are, will face some sort of misinformation attack in the future?
Without question. The question becomes, in this new evolving media landscape, how do you actually get to your audiences? How do you discern who they are and where they are? How do you get your messages in front of them? Where do you go to do that? You know, and there's some interesting emerging opportunities.
In this week's episode, Will and I speak to the amazing Marshall Manson, who has worked at and run some of the world's biggest PR firms. He's a former managing director at Edelman and even an ex-CEO at Ogilvy, and was most recently a partner at Brunswick PR. Marshall is an experienced leader in agency, corporate affairs and marketing. He's worked for a variety of major companies and brands and has a wealth of experience in both brand marketing and corporate communications. Throughout his career, Marshall has created and executed successful digital marketing strategies for major drinks brands and several global FMCG brands. I know you're going to enjoy this episode because Marshall has a very unique take on the media landscape and how to stay relevant while it's changing. So sit back, relax, and let's hear how you can stay relevant while the media around you is changing. Enjoy. Welcome back to Socially Acceptable. This week in the studio, we've got the lovely Marshall Manson. Welcome to the studio, Marshall.
Thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for making the trip up from lovely London.
Absolutely delighted. It was a beautiful trip, beautiful day.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience? You've had an interesting career in what you've been doing, and at the moment you're taking a bit of time out to do extra insightful strategies you've been talking about.
I don't know about that, but it's been a fantastic journey. I've had the chance to do a bit of anything and everything over the years. I started in politics a million years ago. I worked in kind of corporate and public affairs in Washington. I came over here in 2008. I've been in London now for 16 years. Got here, got into marketing, did quite a lot of marketing. Left Edelman, went to Ogilvy, did even more marketing, and a whole load of other really interesting challenges to grapple with at Ogilvy, up to my ears in creativity and the creative ethos of that place, which was absolutely unbelievable. And then the last 6 years or so at Brunswick, big corporate affairs, communications advisory firm, really interesting, big corporate issues, meaty stuff, working into business leaders, CEOs and CFOs. So it's been really interesting over the years. You know, if you think about it, Edelman was all about, top client was the head of comms. Ogilvy, the top client, was the head of marketing. Brunswick, the top client, was the CEO and the CFO. And thinking about how you engage with them, what they want, what they need, what they want to get out of the engagement is it's been a pleasure, absolutely every step of the way. So always learning something.
Would you define yourself as a PR man or a marketer?
I think I'm probably more PR guy than marketer. I love doing marketing, and I love the creative juice in it. But my roots have always been in getting audiences to want to consume things as opposed to forcing them to. But it's funny. I mean, actually, when I was doing politics, I produced an awful lot of television, radio ads. I wrote a lot of direct mail and did a lot of direct marketing. So I guess I'm sort of bilingual. I can do PR or marketing, PR and marketing at the same time.
I thought you meant you could speak American and British English.
Well, I can also speak American and British English. There's a whole vocabulary after 16 years.
Do you say sneakers or trainers?
Well, now these days it's trainers for sure.
Okay. You've crossed over that.
Can you do a Cockney accent yet?
No, absolutely not, and no one wants to hear me try. And the other one that I will never go to is it'll always be sidewalk and it'll never be pavement.
Okay.
So so there's some lines that I can't cross. Ooh, motorway. Yeah, okay. At the moment. Yeah. And actually, depends on which country you're in, right? Yeah. So here it's a motorway. In the U.S., it's an interstate.
Subway or underground?
Oh, again, depends on the city, right? And if it's Chicago, it's the L.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
So today's show, we were talking about what sort of topics to cover. And something that we felt would be a good thing to cover in today's topic is the fact that you've been here 16 years gives you a good perception on the changing media landscape and what's happened with the media in the UK and further afield. So how do you feel like the media's changed in the last 16 years? Because I've noticed a huge difference from when I graduated in PR to today. It's night and day, isn't it?
It's amazing. And I want to be clear, when I talk about media, I'm really talking about media in the marketing sense, which is all the various channels that we might use to reach audiences, right? And obviously within that, you've got newspapers and earned media outlets, and there, it's all changing. If you look at the newspapers, since I got here in 2008, typical newspaper circulation is down something like 75%, depending on which title you pick out. The digital hit rates on all the big newspaper websites since last year are off significantly by about a quarter typically. People are moving away from those traditional news sources. By the way, the one exception is BBC Digital.
Yeah,
the TV watching obviously is dropping.
Yeah.
But the BBC Digital audience kind of has stood up pretty well over the years, which is a real testament.
Do you think that's because of the impartiality allegedly brackets, closed brackets?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's that people here, and I became a British citizen in 2015, so this is as much my home as anywhere. I certainly look at the BBC as an institution, and I value the institution. I don't think it's always impartial necessarily. I think it does its best, but I think it's impossible for any media outlet to be 100% impartial on any topic. Right?
Do you have that sort of thing in the US or not really?
No, I mean there's some media that tries, but by and large, the more traditional media outlets, there's some natural bias that creeps in, and that's fine. Again, as long as you can account for that bias, the reporting I think still tends to really make efforts to be as honest and complete and factual as it possibly can be. So if we start with looking at that, and then we say, okay, what about some of the other channels that marketers have relied on over the years?
Yeah.
In the last 10, 15 years, marketers have come to really rely on things like Google search, right? Social media targeting. Why do we love social media targeting? Because you can get to any audience. You can pick out a set of criteria and sort of say, okay, I want to get to that group, and you can do it. That's all being disrupted now. To what extent is AI going to disrupt Google search? I don't know exactly, but we know it is. And if you look at the Google search results, it already is disrupting it.
Yeah.
And, we're seeing things happen now where SEO firms are beginning to change the way that they deliver. We'll see if that works. But, what if the sort of Google as portal to the whole internet begins to erode? What does that mean for marketers? Well, it means that's a less certain place to go looking for audience. Same thing with social. Social media platforms are now broadly eating themselves. We don't even want to talk.
Elon.
Indeed. Don't even want to talk about what's happened to Twitter. It's actually really sad as somebody who got into it when the thing launched. Be that as it may, from a marketing point of view, if you're a serious marketer, you now can't advertise in Twitter at all because it's too bonkers. Facebook's still viable, or the meta platforms are still viable, really interesting. Instagram's a good spot. Facebook's a pretty good spot. We'll see what happens with WhatsApp. But they're taking away a lot of the targeting criteria that we've been able to use over the years.
Yeah.
LinkedIn, if you're interested in a professional audience, is really strong. Lots of good targeting criteria available there, but we'll see how long that lasts. And the more content goes into LinkedIn, the more they're going to have to throttle it in the same way that Facebook did 10 or so years ago. So if you're a marketer, the question becomes, in this new evolving media landscape, how do you actually get to your audiences? How do you discern who they are and where they are? How do you get your messages in front of them? If you're like me and you want to earn their attention as opposed to just broadcasting at them, then where do you go to do that? And there's some interesting emerging opportunities. I think I would characterize influencer as still emerging, even though we've been doing it for a while. And we can talk about some of the lessons on that a little bit later if you want.
Yeah, sure.
So, influencers emerging. There's a few other things that are interesting that we're going to have to pay attention to. But it's really unclear to me where, if you're a marketer of a big global brand, you can go to build audience. And I think that's one of the most interesting challenges for us in the next 5 years.
So from the marketer's perspective, what does this mean? I mean, 20 years ago, you could do a primetime TV ad during Coronation Street. You could reach a mass audience. So massive fragmentation, declining readerships. What does that mean for the marketer?
I mean, the truth is I don't know yet. I think we're still trying to figure it out. I think there's this fascinating debate in the marketing world about, in effect, performance versus brand building. And that's now been going on for a decade, right?
Yeah.
Probably longer. The truth is you need both. The challenge is how do you invest in both, and how do you know how much to invest in both in a world where your effectiveness and outcomes are uncertain?
And how do you argue that with the client? Because I'm talking agency
Really
side now,
tough.
because we people out there listening to this we're programmed to think KPIs, results.
Yep.
I do an ad. How many clicks have I got? What was my impressions?
100%.
And actually, brand. We were talking about this just before we came online. But brand campaigns, whether it's advertising or PR brand campaigns, protect you against misinformation, right?
Yeah, so I was part of a project where we did a huge amount of research on this, and there were a lot of really interesting learnings that came from that. But one of the most interesting is that even just a basic level of awareness of your brand or company is a massive insulator against misinformation, or if you like, an armor belt against attacks, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to put some armor on and protect yourself from, frankly, an inevitable problem with misinformation, and every brand is going to have a problem with misinformation, by the way, in the next few years, one of the best things you can do is actually invest in some brand building, so that people know you and have heard of you, and that's the sort of basic level. If you go a step further and get to the point where they actually think warmly about the brand, that's an even exponentially greater protector against misinformation or disinformation.
So you used the word inevitable there, which has probably sent shivers down the spine of some listeners. So are you saying it is inevitable that brands, regardless of who they are, will face some sort of misinformation attack in the future?
Without question. It's so easy to create misinformation or disinformation content now. I think if you are in a place as a brand where people know you and you are liked, then there are necessarily the other dynamic at work here, of course, is that, and especially in the U.S., but really across the Western world, the world is becoming more and more polarized, which means if people are for you, then there's a whole group of people who also sort of necessarily wind up being against you. And in a world where there's a bunch of people against you, and it doesn't matter really who you are, somebody's going to do something either unintended or nefarious that you're going to have to pay attention to. And the consequences of those misinformation, disinformation, either efforts or unintended consequences, can be huge. This is a bit narrow, but and less about marketing and more about kind of actually operations even. I did a project for a big bank where if you look at Silicon Valley Bank, if you look at what happened to one of the Swiss banks last year, actually social media misinformation drove the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. And don't take my word for it. There's a big Federal Reserve paper and a study from a bunch of really credible economists who say so.
Wow.
Okay, so in a world where social media can bring down a bank, right, we ought not underestimate the level of impact that misinformation can have on a brand that's just trying to market itself.
Well, that brought down a bank, but I mean, the same thing could be said for public relations and social media with Northern Rock, right? As soon as somebody started saying, "Oh, not when when the financial crisis happened in the UK," they just said, "Look at the queues outside of people taking their money out." Do you remember that?
Yeah,
and that took the bank down as well.
So this is incredibly nerdy, actually. But sorry to the audience for being incredibly nerdy. Mm-hmm. We've actually put a huge amount of study, economic study, into the dynamics of bank runs since the Great Depression in the 30s. Mm-hmm. And people really understand pretty well how they work. So the lines outside a bank is a good example. Like, as soon as you see that, it's game over, right? Mm. But all those studies basically assume that the bank run is going to play out over a matter of weeks or months. And what happened with Silicon Valley Bank was that the bank went from liquid and thriving to bankrupt in 12 hours, because you can take money out anytime, because actually there were some unusual things about them, but a lot of their depositors had big deposits with them, so could remove a lot of cash out of the bank very, very quickly. And actually the reason the Federal Reserve Report exists in the U.S. is all of that happened out of hours at a period when the Federal Reserve was just closed.
Right.
It was a weekend. So the SVB sort of goes, well, normally what we would do is we would call up the Federal Reserve Clearinghouse and say, we need some help. The clearinghouse has gone home. So okay, that's
a classic crisis management. It never happens between
That's
9 and 5.
The worst possible Monday morning, isn't it?
Of course,
Coming in and finding-
we've got no job.
By the time we get to Monday, the Fed was very much on the case. But bottom line is, you think about kind of all the dynamics we've understood about bank runs for the last, whatever it is, nearly 100 years.
Yeah.
Now applying that through the lens of being driven by digital social media and increasingly things like AI. And what do you get? Well, you get a dynamic where this is actually a really significant threat. And by the way, that's one example from one vertical, one kind of business.
It's interesting,
and you could easily dream those up for pretty much any other kind of business you want.
Before you go, hang on, Will. Before you go, if you do like brand misinformation, we did a podcast 2 episodes ago where we interviewed Ant Cousins from Cision, who talked exactly about how to avoid brand misinformation. Because you're right, he was talking extensively about how much of a threat it is. Sorry, Will. Carry on.
So for anyone that doesn't know the details of the misinformation in the context of Silicon Valley Bank, why don't you talk us through what happened?
Well, I mean, so basically what happened was a load of Silicon Valley Bank investors, and often these things start with investors, started talking about the financial health of the bank. There's some analysts talking about it. All this was happening on Twitter, by the way. And then some of their big depositors started noticing this conversation and going, oh, that's interesting. I'm a bit worried about this. This sounds pretty bad. And then somebody said, well, actually, I'm going to take some money out. And then somebody else said, well, I'm going to take all my money out. And then SVB was a huge depository for a lot of the big Silicon Valley VCs, but particularly personal money, in addition to corporate money, but personal money, both. Anyway, this all happened on a sort of Thursday, Friday, but then Friday night, after remember it's a Pacific time in the U.S., after the close of business Eastern time, which is when the Fed clearinghouse closed, all these fairly big depositors said, we're going to start moving money out. And by the time they got to end of day Saturday, there was a huge amount of liquid pressure on the bank. Well, that's a term of art that means they're out of cash, basically. And by the time they got to Sunday, they needed a rescue. And then Sunday afternoon, the Fed stepped in and in effect, one, guaranteed the deposits and then rescued them. And then early the following week said, we're going to actually stand up for the corporate deposits as well, because it could have taken down half the valley.
So what could and should they have done differently then? Because there's some really good parallels here. Yes, we're talking about financial services, but like you say, this could be an FMCG brand. It could be anything, couldn't it? What should and could they have done?
I mean, the crucial thing for me, so those of us who have been in PR for a long time, we remember the old school crisis manual, right? It's a 3-ring binder. You pulled it down off a shelf, you turned to page 7, you went, right, it's a silver crisis. What do I do now? Now, and that's guidance on how to manage a reputational crisis. The trick with SVB and the challenge in that financial services example is that's not a reputational crisis. That's an existential threat to the business, right? And so one of the first things that you got to think about is a decision, a judgment about, is this a reputational crisis? In which case, select door number 1 and go do all the reputational things that we can talk about, but that we kind of broadly know how to do. Or is it door number 2, which is this could close us down by Monday or a week from Monday, whatever. This could close us down. Okay, that then requires a whole different disposition, posture. And the posture has to not just involve comms. In financial services, it's got to involve the people who handle the money, right? In a brand, it's got to involve people on the operations side, probably. The best example in my mind of a crisis situation of all time that was an existential threat, probably, I don't know if you guys will remember or not, this was a big thing in the U.S. when I was a kid. It was the early 80s. Somebody was going around injecting Tylenol, which is paracetamol. It's the name brand of paracetamol in the U.S. Somebody was injecting Tylenol bottles with poison. And so you'd buy a bottle of Tylenol at the pharmacy, you go home and take a couple of pills and be dead, right? And this happened about 3 or 4 times. They couldn't work out who was doing it or how.
Or why.
I can't remember if they ever caught the person who did it or not. I was 40 years ago, so sorry, I've lost that detail. But Tylenol did, actually in respect, the one and only thing they could do, which was they recalled every single bottle of Tylenol in the world. right?
Wow.
And they junked them. And they said, we can't trust our own supply. It's too important for us to get this wrong. We're going to pay to recall everything. It's going to take us a few weeks to replace them on your shelves. So, hopefully you've got some at home. But if you've got any questions about the bottle, just bring it to a pharmacy and they'll destroy it for you. And Tylenol still, 40 years later, is the number one selling painkiller in the U.S.
Wow.
They saved the brand.
Yeah.
But that wasn't a reputational move. That's the brand's going to disappear if we don't handle this right. And that's an operational challenge.
Bold and ballsy, isn't it,
Yeah,
really?
it really was.
I mean, the thing about, I was going to say, like the bank example is one of the only examples where you could just literally be stripped of everything you've got overnight, and that we all know that banks loan more money than they've actually got,
Yep.
right? Whereas actually, that example you've just used there is where they took the product, because quite a few car brands have had that sort of issue as well, where we had the Volkswagen emissions crisis, didn't we?
Yeah, that's a tougher one. And I don't want to wail away on Volkswagen too much, but that's a tougher one because it turns out that the engineers in Volkswagen were knowingly falsifying the test results,
Which is not
so that's a slightly different kettle of fish.
black hat marketing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's misinformation so much as misbehavior.
Yeah.
And look, I'm not saying that's not existential, but the fact that it's existential, so door number 2, and that you've done it to yourself puts you in a slightly different place in terms of what your posture has to be.
Yeah.
And all in all, it's been a few years now. Actually, the Volkswagen brand's come through it pretty well.
Yeah, it has.
And so I think we can say, I certainly would say, I think they handled it as about as well as they could have, given the circumstances.
Yeah.
I mean, we could probably debate that for hours, but
Yeah.
it's a tough one. And the point about it's not misinformation. You've done it to yourself, and so you just kind of have to learn to live with it. I think it's important learning.
So what other media then do you think have changed? What's you talk about changing media landscape?
Well, I mean, we hit on television.
Yeah.
So if you go back to the 80s and you think about channels in the 80s, there's TV, radio, print, right? Simple, and direct mail, direct marketing of whatever assortment. So then 90s you had web, late 90s you had search. Early 2000s, you start adding various forms of social. By the time you get 2010, you've got a really well-developed social ecosystem. Am I leaving anything out channel-wise? No, that's pretty much still. There's a few other things, but whatever. Those are the big ones. Every single one of those is declining. Every single one of them is declining.
Apart from YouTube.
Well, yeah. I mean,
That never seems to go down, does it?
What's YouTube? Is YouTube the new TV network? It's interesting. I was reading something. It was a Ben Evans thing, actually. Those of you not reading Ben Evans, he's my favorite go-to tech analyst. You can subscribe to his newsletter, and no, I don't have a sponsorship deal. But Ben, if you want to call me, please do.
We'll get Ben on the pod. Yeah. Sounds like an interesting character.
He'd be great to have. He's a genius, actually. Anyway, he was talking about there was a big announcement this week in the U.S. that a bunch of the live sports networks, in effect, are getting together to provide a unified sports streaming service. And Ben referred to it as a rebundling of live video services, which is interesting because over the past couple of years, we've seen more and more and more video fragmentation, right? Netflix and Disney Plus and Paramount Plus and blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
And so now we've all got 15 subscriptions.
We've got too many.
That I'd hardly watch, right?
Yeah.
So actually, so what's happened is they've taken a concept too far.
Yeah.
They've left the consumer behind. And so now they're doing something smart. They're coming back to the consumer and saying, we're going to try to make this easier for you.
This is the Gartner hype cycle in full effect, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it is, actually. I hadn't thought about that, but that's absolutely right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Anyway, I mentioned that because it's like, okay, to your point about YouTube, is YouTube, in the way that Google was the portal to the internet, is YouTube the portal to all things video and audio?
I think it still is.
I don't know. I think it is.
Still is.
Yeah, it feels that way to me.
It's still YouTube is a unique channel because is it social? Is it web? Is it both? And it's still got organic reach exists on YouTube like it does on TikTok.
And discovery. I mean, that's the thing. I remember the old days of the web. There's this wonderful book called The Clue Train Manifesto, which talked about hyperlinks as currency. That we could cite to each other and pass traffic back. How much does that happen anymore? Hardly any, right? But where do you get discovery? Where do people explore? Well, they explore thanks to algorithmic discovery, right?
Yeah.
So I've got a friend who works for YouTube, and I had never used YouTube Shorts before, and I was talking to him. He said, "You should try Shorts," and now I'm freaking addicted to it. I can't get away from it.
And it's serving you bespoke content.
Yeah,
exactly
totally.
in
It's
line with
good.
your-
It really is.
It's crazy.
I get what I want from it.
So the clips from this show, there'll be a clip from this show, right? And we maybe do two on YouTube Shorts. And like a while ago, sort of 3 months ago, we were getting like 300, 400 views, which is good because they're all the right people. 2 weeks ago, they went to like 2.7 thousand.
Yeah, and they'll continue to grow.
Go up.
I mean,
It's
that's
mental.
And I have to say, one of the things I think I really admire about the way that YouTube has kind of calibrated their platform is they reward people who invest in publishing consistently.
Yeah.
We can debate about whether or not that's important, but I think it's interesting. I have a confession. I have an ironic confession, given what we're doing right now. I'm not actually a massive podcast listener.
Oh, okay.
But I do actually watch podcasts. I have about a half dozen that I watch on YouTube. So there's a golf podcast that I watch religiously. I've never downloaded it and listened to the podcast, but I watch it on YouTube all the time.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, we talk a lot about the evolution of B2B podcasting, and obviously the old model is audio only, sit down for an hour.
No, this is much better.
But we're now getting towards this integrated model where you might watch a podcast or you might just watch the snippets, but essentially it's still podcasting. It's just
100%.
a different medium.
100%. And the other thing I like about it, so I spent a lot of time over the past few years kind of talking to business leaders about their own profiles. And there's some business leaders for whom actually this sort of environment is perfect, right? I'm not sitting in, it's not a hostile interview.
Yes.
It's not we'll see how we go. But
We ain't got to part 2 yet.
indeed. It's not a formal setting with a journalist. Actually, if I'm a business leader, I might even sit with a colleague and say, hey, you're the world leading expert on whatever, lithium mining, just to make something up. Let's talk about the future of,
They're worth a lot.
of lithium, right? Yeah. Okay, and all that business leaders got to do is sit around a table. Yeah, there's a microphone, might be some cans, there might be a camera, but all you got to do is sit around a table and have a conversation, and we'll take care of the rest. In a lot of ways, it's the perfect solution in my mind for a business leader who needs some profile, and we know there's value in the business leader having some profile, but just isn't comfortable with a lot of the more traditional methods.
Well, on that, actually, I think that's worth digging into. So 20 years ago, you want to do some executive profiling. It's very much, sit down with the FT, sit down with the Sunday Times. There'd be those big ticket speaking engagements. That's all starting to change, isn't it? And now we do see business leaders becoming much more influential on social media. Is that, from your experience?
You have to, right? I mean, so we all know. I mean, and actually, if we took a poll of the 3 people in this room, I have no doubt we'd get 100% result. Would you rather read something that's written, posted, created by a human being or a corporate? We all know the answer to that. You'd much rather hear from the human being, right?
Yeah.
So would I rather kind of subscribe to, listen to, sign up to, and I'm going to pick somebody at random, the CEO of Unilever versus the Unilever corporate LinkedIn channel? Well, that's and I'm not having a go at the Unilever corporate LinkedIn channel. It's great. But I'd just much rather listen to a human being than the corporate channel, right? So I think where that gets us to is to say, not only is it in the interest of most CEOs to have a valuable profile, they're also communications channels. And it's really funny when you say that to a CEO, they slightly recoil in terror. It's like, no, really, you're a communications channel, and you need to appreciate that as part of your leadership kind of responsibilities, that you're an important voice for the company.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that we use that voice, that channel, really well. So that's, to me, a really strong argument for why and how you then get into building, and it's not just CEO, by the way, it's leadership profile. It's down the second tier. And given that we've got lots of marketers, CMOs in a marketing community talking about creativity and why they're investing in the way they are, and how they're developing their marketing strategies and so forth. Those are incredibly valuable, incredibly influential voices, and the same applies to them. They're an important channel, and we need and can be an important channel to help with the marketing.
I agree.
So we need
completely.
to use them well.
Yeah, and I think that the two coexisting, you've got your very optimized brand presence, but then you've got that kind of mid-tier and above of executives who are kind of becoming thought leaders online. Funny on this, Chris. you remember a few years ago when we used to talk to brands about building the profile of individuals in the business? The conversation usually was, great, but what happens if they leave? And that started to stop that. The conversation is, okay, they might leave, but what happens if it works? What happens if it...
But I've seen some agencies do that where they've hired, like, there's been certain agencies that we've seen, like search agencies who've got big budgets, right, which has been against the PR agencies, and there's an argument there for another day. But I've seen some of those big guys hire, like, head of social, and then they go into this whole thing where they're building their profile, they're vlogging, they're doing all this thing about their own career. And then, they're only there for a year, and then they go somewhere else.
And take the audience with them.
Exactly that.
But then the flip side is, but what about the benefit while they are there? And I suppose it's collateral damage, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, my view on that is you get down to third tier leadership, so outside of the C-suite. The question is, can you find the right sort of subject matter expert to really excite an audience? 100 years ago, we were doing some work for a car company, and this was pre-social media. There was a big discussion happening about a new model in a very kind of obscure car forum, and they were getting some stuff wrong. So we actually convinced the car company to let the engineer who designed the car go in the car forum. The community went bonkers. They all knew who he was. They all loved him. He'd been designing cars for this company for years. It was like he spent maybe 2 weeks in there and turned that community from being really skeptical about the new model to being absolute zealous advocates for the new model. Now, okay, turn on a dime, doesn't happen very often, usual caveats apply. But the fact of the matter was, it was because he was the subject matter expert.
Yeah.
As opposed to some executive, or worse yet, a PR person.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Marshall from fill-in name of car company here. I'm a PR advisor to them. Can I speak to you, please?
No.
Well, of course, the answer is no. But you turn up with the engineer who designed the thing, and the car nuts go crazy. Of course they do.
It's all about the authenticity there, isn't it?
100%.
And
having the shared base of knowledge.
Yeah.
You'll know all about this. We're reading the latest Edelman Trust Barometer, and trust in the media is down, trust in chief executives down, trust in corporations is down, but trust in regular employees is up. So those brands that get it right and build up their subject matter experts are onto a winning thing, aren't they?
It's funny. I was with Edelman when we first put the we put person like me in the survey, and then we put regular employee in the survey about 2 years later, and so that was maybe 13, 14 years ago. And the first year we did it, we were all shocked. We thought it would score well, but it's a person like me scored as the number one most trusted source of information. And then we thought about that for a minute and went, well, that was dumb of us not to understand that before we put it in the survey. And then the same thing happened with regular employee, and it sort of stayed right up there among the most trusted. The reality is, and it's not hard to understand, if you take this out of the hypothetical, theoretical comms world and just put it in your daily life, of course you're going to trust somebody you know more than somebody you don't know. Of course you're going to trust somebody you think you can empathize with as opposed to somebody you can't. This isn't hard to understand. So we need to make more of those sorts of people, those sorts of voices available.
But the media and the journalists, the trust in them is down. So that's what's worrying. Like, how do you? This goes back to your very first question. How do you get your message across to your audience? Where is your audience? You've got your brand discovery on the channels we've discussed, but how do you get to that audience with the trust?
You just have to be. I think increasingly, we have to figure out ways to be in more places. And the thing that frustrates clients, I think rightly, is that it's complicated. If you want to have a bunch of different audiences and a bunch of different messages for those audiences distributed on a whole bunch of different platforms, the complexity of actually delivering that marketing or communications program grows exponentially every time you add a new audience, a new platform, or a new bit of content, right? So it's really hard to wrap your head around it. And there are a lot of marketing and comms people who were brought up on the idea, and I was one of them actually, brought up on the idea that you have one message, you repeat it until you can't stand repeating it anymore, and then maybe you move on to the next one, but probably not. Actually, so
we're going to build a wall.
Yeah, well, exactly. But I think where I am, I think we haven't moved as far from that as some people think. Fundamentally, it is still about having a message.
Yeah.
But it's about delivering that message in different flavors for different audiences on different platforms or in different channels in a way that audience that you're trying to get to will respond to most favorably.
Not like when Teresa kept saying strong and stable. God, they said it another time.
We at Prohibition, I mean, it's an interesting theory that, by the way, it sounds like a lot more work for marketers, in the way that you used to be able to. Is that fair?
I'm not sure. So this is one of the bits, and I'm sure there are people who are listening to this who will email me or message me and tell me how wrong I am, which is absolutely fine, by the way. But I really think that this is a problem AI is going to help us solve, or that smarter kind of campaign management tools is going to help us solve. If you think about right now, one of the massive inefficiencies in any big marketing program is audience customization, platform customization, localization, right? So we're supposed to publish videos in different sizes to YouTube and LinkedIn, just to pick a silly example, right? To pick a different silly example, except it's not silly at all, is if you're running a multi-market campaign in Europe, you got to get the language right? And right now, that's incredibly inefficient. That's bound to change, right? We're bound to get to a place where actually AI is going to solve this problem for us, and all the problems of localization, maybe not all, 89% of the problems of localization will kind of go away. Same with platform customization, right? All I need to do is produce a video, hand it to a tool, and say, right, optimize this for every platform, and it renders for us, and we have it 5 minutes later, right? That's where we're going to be. So in that case, maybe it's not that much more complicated. Maybe we just need to wait and understand how we can use the tools to make those things more achievable.
And the other observation, which is something we talk about a lot, I think brands need to become more comfortable with the fact that their kind of precious idea may evolve as it moves from platform and channel to channel. And I think, so we talk about the idea of channel neutral ideas, which almost is an idea that sits above platform and it evolves and changes and has a life of its own. Is that fair?
I think that's the ideal. I think we may need to begin to allow for the possibility that we're going to have to invite a bit more variance at the channel level. So the way that you communicate an idea on TikTok probably isn't the same way that you would do it in an email, for example, which, oh, by the way, we haven't talked about at all, but is probably still the most important channel that our clients have access to reach their customers directly. Anyway, we'll come back to that if you want. But no, the bottom line for me is we've got to allow for the possibility of a little bit more variance and customization. Not to say we depart from the central idea, because the central idea is still the central idea, but actually we allow for different expressions of that idea that work at the channel level, because increasingly the audiences and the channels are different. A minute ago, you sort of went, okay, well, Facebook's kind of everybody, Instagram's getting to be everybody, Twitter's this sort of elite, whatever, echo chamber, Snapchat's young people. Okay, well, now you get a situation where TikTok is increasingly, it's where you go to get the young people, especially outside of the English-speaking world. Snap is still thriving. YouTube Shorts is a fundamentally different user base than main YouTube. Reels is a different user base than main Instagram. Facebook's still trying to put some oomph into the main Facebook app. Different behaviors, different ways in different parts of that. So all of a sudden, you've got three different executions in the same platform, right? So we need to allow for a little bit more variance.
And that requires bravery on the part of the brand, doesn't it? The keeping control of your message is a thing of the past, surely.
Well, I've been singing that tune for a long time, and I know it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. At the end of the day, it's your message. So I'm not saying that you're going to lose control of your message. You're going to produce what you're going to produce. But I think what I'm saying is, if you were having a bunch of people over to your house and two of them turned up and said, hey, listen, I'm a vegetarian. If you're a good host, you're going to make them a really nice vegetarian dish, right? And the other 6 people who've come to dinner are going to have whatever you've made for them. But that doesn't change the fact that you've invited everybody for dinner. I think the thought here for me is brands need that central idea. What is the brand? What does it stand for? What's its value? What's the creative idea that brings all of that to life? And then If they're vegetarians, feed them vegetarian. If they really like a big steak, feed them a big steak. That's not getting away from the core idea, though. So yes, it's your message, it's your idea, but let people eat what they want to eat.
I'll tell you what, this is making me hungry, if anything else.
Sorry.
It's all right. So this show's all about fuck-ups then. We've heard a lot about your experience, but obviously in your experience, I'm sure you don't make many, but you did share one fuck-up with us, which was from way back in 2006 called Walmarting Across America.
Yeah.
And before you start this, we've got a PR apprentice at Prohibition, and he sent me a message because he's seen this guest sheet because I was discussing it with him. And he did the PRCA PR apprenticeship, and he thinks that this was part of the program.
Oh, part of the curriculum.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So I can't wait to hear.
I'm famous
about
for all the wrong
what
reasons.
happened.
So look, this is a good story, and I thought I just a tiny bit of context. I thought I would talk about it because even though it's from 20 years ago now, there's some lessons that we can apply to particularly modern kind of influencer marketing. Some real watch outs to learn from. So I hope audience will enjoy it. But this was quite famous. It was kind of everywhere for a while back in whatever it was, 2006. So
Walmart owns Asda, doesn't it?
yeah,
If people
no,
don't
it
know
doesn't
that.
anymore. Doesn't anymore.
Does it?
Because the guys who own the gas stations bought Asda.
They bought it
remember?
out, right? Yeah.
Sitting here in Leeds, doesn't know who owns Asda.
I know.
Come on, man.
We literally direct Asda House as well. That's right. I can actually see it out the window.
Literally, I'm looking out the window at Asda.
They'll start throwing cabbages at me and stuff.
I'll edit that bit out, don't worry.
We won't.
So Walmart, big retailer. I'm sure most people have heard of it at least. Big retailer all over the U.S. And we were doing some work with them. They were dealing with some really tough reputational challenges. Some political, some more driven by marketing. But basically, they were the biggest, and therefore they were under attack. Some of that was related to union politics. Some of it related to big national politics. All of that doesn't really matter all that much. Suffice to say, they were under attack, and the people who were attacking them were organized and well-funded. And so we were trying to just build a case that, look, think what you will of Walmart, but this is an American company. It's a good company full of good people that plays a really important role in cities and towns all over the U.S. So as part of a much, much larger communication strategy, a few of us were sitting around one day and kind of thinking about a few little tactical execution ideas. And so in the UK, we've got caravans. In the US, we've got RVs, okay? And if you don't know what an RV is, just check out Breaking Bad.
Walter White.
Well, indeed. So Walter likes to make his product in the back of an RV, as we would call it if you're an American.
Product.
Good quality product, indeed. So RVing is a bit of a culture in the US, the way caravanning is here in the UK. And we discovered, sort of by accident, that Walmart had this amazing rule. And I actually don't know if this is still the case or not, so don't go doing this without checking it out first. Walmart basically said, if you're driving around in your RV and you need to stop someplace for the night, you're very welcome to park in any of our parking lots. So you could do an overnighter in a Walmart store parking lot, pay nothing, no problem. You know, they sort of say, go out in the kind of far reaches of the parking lot, don't park right in front of the store, but whatever. And actually, it's a great thing because if, you know, in the U.S. distances are long, you might be driving a few days to get from one place to another. Having a place you can park and sleep in your RV, get a little rest in, it's fantastic. We love this idea. And you think about the kind of portrait we were trying to paint of Walmart as a great American company, you know, facilitating trips in RVs for folks who, you know, just going out and enjoying the American countryside. You know, what could be more red, white, and blue than that?
Yeah, families.
Absolutely fantastic, right? Yeah. So the idea was we were going to get some folks to go on an RV trip.
All right.
We thought we'd get them an RV. We thought we'd outfit it, you know, kind of with some Walmart branding. And what we thought we'd do is we'd send them on a road trip and get them to stop along the way and write a blog. Now, this was before Facebook and Twitter existed. So no social media, pure blogging, right? So we thought we'd get them to, you know, kind of go out, write this blog and kind of basically a travel diary. So we liked the idea. We pitched it to the client. They liked the idea. And so we went off to recruit the folks who were going to do the trip and write the blog.
Have to be good writers, right?
Well, yeah. So actually, we thought it would be clever if we could find a pair, actually, somebody who could do the writing, and then ideally, if somebody was along to kind of take some photos. YouTube had only just started, so maybe a little video, but uploading from 3G from the road probably not going to work. So some photos would be nice. So we were kind of thinking if we could find a writer, photographer pair, that would be really neat. And as it happened, one of the folks on our team knew someone. Great. Freelance writer, husband was a professional photographer. This sounds perfect. So we asked them if they want to do it. Got to pay them some money. Fine. So we get them to come in, and I'm going to teach them about how the blog works.
Which platform? Typepad.
It was TrueType, actually.
Oh, right, okay. Back in the day.
Oh, sorry, hang on. No, I misspoke. It's Typepad. It actually was Typepad.
I was thinking when you were saying that it was back in the days of blogging, because it was Typepad and WordPress. WordPress one in there.
Why don't you ask me that again, and I'll just agree. No, yeah. So, and I actually have to say, our designer, who was a genius, and I've actually lost touch with, but he built. We thought it'd be really fun to overbuild the thing. So we actually did three themes. So there was an Indiana Jones theme, there was like an Airstream 1950s theme, and there was a third theme, I can't remember what it was. And they were all beautiful, and you could sort of toggle between them, get different views, different scents. There was a big map that was going to be filled in along the way. It was really, we had a ball with it. So one of the development of it was as much fun as I've had doing any of this. So anyway, so the two of them, our writer and photographer, come in to see me to get their blogger training. So that involves a bunch of stuff. I'm going to teach them what blogging is because they didn't really know. I'm going to teach them how to use the platform. And then, we'd done a lot of blogger training at that point. I was going to give them some just, best practices in terms of blogging ethics. And that was kind of the curriculum, and I had a half a day with them. So our designer developer walks in with the laptop with the site on it and says, right, we've set everything up for you. Writer, here's your account. With your name on it. Obviously, all your stuff will be bylined. Photographer, here's your account. Anything you publish, it's going to say, as all the blogs did at that time, posted by Marshall, posted by Chris, whatever.
Flickr.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And we had a Flickr feed for him.
Yeah,
actually, it's a good shout. We did have that.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that was the moment where it all went off the rails. Because they looked at me and said, oh, no, we don't want our names on the site. I said, sorry, what? They said, we're going to do this anonymously. We don't want to have our names on the site. I said, well, that's a bit weird. I'm going to have to think about that. I think we probably need your names on the site. So whatever, we finish the training. I go away and I start talking to our bosses and people around the building, whatever, team. They don't want their name on the site. This feels like it's a problem. Not sure. Anyway, we had some discussion about it, and ultimately we decided that it was okay. We'd let the thing go ahead.
Anonymously?
If they wanted to blog anonymously, that was okay. We just have it.
Did you not think about maybe going to somebody else? Because it's just, you could have replaced them with whoever, couldn't you?
So this is a classic PR/marketing campaign problem, right? I'm training them on Thursday. They're leaving on Monday.
Right.
So
last minute.
Yeah, well, it didn't need to be any more or less last minute, right? It was the right time to do the training. The site was built. They were going on the trip. So would we have done that 3 weeks earlier? I can't imagine a scenario where I'd done the training 3 weeks earlier.
Why did they want to be anonymous?
I don't know. So I want to give them some benefit of the doubt here, particularly because it was 20 years ago, and I've had no contact with them since. But my recollection is that they were both in effect freelance journalists, and I think they were concerned that if their byline was on something that was fundamentally a corporate project, that they might struggle in the future to get other freelance journalism gigs.
Got you.
I want to be clear. That's an assumption on my part. I don't mean to impugn their motives with any. I have no idea.
Yep.
That's the best of my recollection. So we took their name off the site and we let them fly off to. I think they started in New Mexico. We let them fly off to New Mexico to start the trip. And everything was fine. So they got to New Mexico, picked up the RV. It looked amazing. They started the trip, went from one Walmart to another. And the idea was that they were going to interview other RVers that they encountered in Walmart parking lots, kind of talk about the culture of that and so forth.
Great.
And I have to say, they got some credit. They got some great stuff. Some of the stuff they were writing was just absolutely lovely. some really nice things about importance of Walmart in communities and so forth and so on. And then they kind of later in the trip, we had arranged for a journalist who covered the company to come down and just bump into this and interview them. And the journalist did come down. In retrospect, we didn't pick that journalist very well, but be that as it may. That journalist came down to meet up with them in a Walmart parking lot, did a lovely interview where these two said all the right things, everything that you'd have hoped for as a PR person for the company. And she wrote up this really lovely sort of 400-word story. But the last line of the story was, by the way, these two advocates for the company refused to give their names. They wouldn't give their names to the journalist, in addition to not having their names on the site.
And let me guess, this spiraled quickly.
Yeah.
And this opens a whole can of worms about all sorts
Why?
of issues.
Why?
doesn't it?
Why?
Yeah. So now we go from having something that, if done right, is a really lovely kind of not very expensive nod to a community of people in the U.S. who the company values, who values the company, and a potential reputational positive, beyond that audience. Now you're into, hang on a minute, this now feels really dodgy. Is this contrived? Why is the company doing this? Have they just made the whole thing up? What's the and you start digging into motivations and whatever. And so the first couple of days after that initial story hit were pretty awful because there was a lot of interest in the company at the time. We were on the front page of the New York Times, we were on the front page of the Washington Post.
And what were the headlines when you were on the...
I don't really remember. I've kind of blotted all that out of my mind. They were every bit as bad as you would expect. But actually, it was the PR and marketing trades that really hit the hardest, because the mainstream media is basically taking the angle of, this a bit uncool, controversy, whatever. The trades were really, really dissecting it and hitting us for all the right. I mean, to be clear, all the criticism we took was justified, but they were hitting us on the really nitty-gritty granular stuff that I had been sitting in meeting rooms talking about 4 days earlier and getting wrong. So, they got us. And I think the other big thing was, this was Edelman in 2006. Richard and all of us in the company had staked out a big positioning on, we're going to lead the way in digital. And we'd done some really good work. I've got some clips, actually some from Walmart at home on my wall, that I'm genuinely proud of. Some stuff we were doing with bloggers, some of the stuff we were doing with content, like we were there before anybody.
Yeah, you were. I was reading your stuff when you were doing that.
It was great. Some of it was genuinely great, but we got this wrong. So the first few days were pretty crap, and I was essentially in UK PR speak. I was a senior account manager at the time. In the U.S., I was a senior account supervisor. I don't know why the difference. So I was, at best, a sort of mid-level, person in what was then a 3,000-person agency working for one of the world's biggest companies. It would have been really easy to pitch me overboard, right? And I remember the guy running the account came around to my desk in the middle of this and said, "Hey, listen, Richard's coming down tomorrow. He wants to see you."
Oh, God. Lovely.
Great.
Hello, Mr. Edelman.
And so Richard came down, who I maybe talked to, but I certainly didn't know. Anyway, so I wound up sitting in the head of the DC office's office with Richard.
Shaking.
Pretty much, yeah. And really thinking I was going to get fired. In retrospect, 20 years on, I realized I never should have thought that, because if they were going to fire me, they just had an HR person do it, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, be that as it may. So I'm sitting there with Richard, and he said, "Right, let's talk about what happened." We went through it all. I talked about some of the points where we made the wrong call. And I said, "Richard, the moment I should have pulled the plug on this was when the two of them told me they didn't want their name on the site. That was the point where we should have known this wasn't going to work." Of course, the challenge was what? We built the site, we'd outfitted the RV, which was not a small amount of money, and we made all this planning, right? So the sort of gravitational force of getting the campaign away was really, really strong.
Yeah,
We've all been
significant
there.
sunk costs.
Yeah, you've spent a ton of cash. You want this thing to go. If you got to call a client and say we're calling it off, like that's a terrible call to have to make.
Yeah.
So, and anyway, we had this conversation, and at the end of it, Richard said to me, "Listen, we're doing stuff here that nobody's done before. Nobody knows what the rules are. We're working out the rules as we go. We have to trust ourselves to practice ethically at the highest level of ethics that we can imagine. We didn't get it right here." I said, "No, we didn't." He said, "But actually, we'll learn a lot of good lessons from this, and I want you and the team to go on and keep pushing boundaries. And whatever else happens in my professional career, I will never not be an advocate of Richard Edelman on the basis of that conversation." Because it would have been really easy to throw me overboard and say, some mid-level guy in Washington did a bad job on this.
It's his fault.
He's taking responsibility and he's no longer with the company.
Yeah.
Right? How
That's
many
true
times have we
leadership.
seen that statement? And Richard said, no. We're working. There's a new thing. We don't know what we're doing. None of us knows what we're doing. And you guys are coming the closest to getting it right. Keep going.
That's proper leadership.
And I stayed in the company 6 more years after that, and they moved me to London. And the
Amazing.
reason I'm here and have had the life I've had is that Richard and his team showed an awful lot of confidence in me personally following that incident, which was a big reputational black eye for Edelman.
With a big client as well.
Yeah, to the point that, I mean, we're 18 years later and it's still being used in PR student curricula.
The people out there listening to that thinking, thank God that wasn't me.
Well, that's a great story, and like Chris says, that is. I mean, what a visionary! You know, he could see the direction of travel, and he.
And he knew that in order to get it right, we were going to have to get it wrong.
It's that move fast, break things mentality of Silicon Valley.
So I've kind of gotten allergic to move fast, break things. I'm sorry, I'm having a quibble here, but there is a constructive outcome to this, I promise. Break things implies that you're sort of damaging in a way that is irreparable. So I've got a twist on that. My twist on that is I'd rather be fast and wrong than slow and right. And my idea, the idea behind that is, if I'd applied it in this situation, the fast and wrong would have been make the decision to go ahead, but then unmake it 6 hours later, right? To say, okay, I made this decision, but actually we need to review it because I don't think it's right, right? So fast and wrong as opposed to slow and right, because slow and right doesn't get you anywhere. It just gets you behind, right? Fast and wrong gets you the opportunity to go, we're going to do something. If we get it wrong, we're going to learn from it. Then we're going to do it differently and better. And we're going to do all of that fast. So by the time slow and right has had 1 iteration, we're going to have 7, which means we're going to be 6 generations ahead of slow and right. I'll take that 100% of the time.
I feel like that could be the headline of our podcast.
Fast and wrong.
Yeah, I like it.
Fast and very wrong.
Yeah, brilliant.
So thanks for coming on the show, Marshall. Honestly, I could talk to you for another 3 hours. That's the thing. Where can people find you if they want to get in contact with you?
So best place is probably LinkedIn these days. I've sadly had to give up Twitter, which fills me with sadness, but I've given it up. So LinkedIn's probably the best place. Facebook, Instagram, Threads, all of those. But yeah, LinkedIn, drop me a message if you want to chat and we'll find a time.
And you've been on the show now. We've asked you. You can see the premise of the show. And
It's great, by the way.
Right, thank you. If you were us, who is the next guest that you'd invite, and what would you ask them?
You're going to have to cut out me thinking about this.
Or we'll add some sound effects as you're thinking.
A few minutes later.
I mean, look, if you want somebody aspirational, you got to ask Byron Sharp, right?
Brian Sharp.
Byron
Sharp.
Byron, I think.
You don't get many Byrons these
God,
days.
somebody
do you?
check my spelling. He's a marketing commentator who wrote the definitive book on the issue of performance marketing versus brand building.
Right, okay.
He's written an amazing book about that topic, and he has just unbelievable thoughts on the question of channels. Listen, I really have enjoyed it, guys. Thanks very much for having me along. It's been nice to sit around and talk.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
you.
Thanks, Marshall.
Thank you for listening to Socially Unacceptable. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a 5-star review. Don't forget to follow us on social media on Instagram, TikTok and LinkedIn at Prohibition PR and Twitter at Socially UA. We would love to hear some of your career fuck-ups so we can share them on the show. For more information on the show, search Prohibition PR in your search engine and click on podcasts. Until next time, please keep pushing the boundaries and embracing the socially unacceptable.